Someday, we will get to the end of the Epsonite road. And someday the whole master universe will be finished. It'll be done. And God the ultimate will be a finished being. And this will mean the complete function of deity on this seventh level. Well, is it all over then? No, it's not all over. Because things can happen. Let's go back to the beginning now and consider what things were like just before the creative level was reached. At the beginning of all things, we have, in what I call the zero universe age, or just before the first universe age, we have two existential deities, right? The Father and the Son. And they have a power platform for operations, the Isle of Paradise. And what do? They produce a being equal to themselves, achieve the union of the Trinity, the first Trinity, and produce a universe which is limited as to quantity, but unlimited as to quality. I'm sure they could have filled all infinity with Havona, but they chose not to. They limited their creative act, didn't they, to 1 billion worlds. But they didn't limit it as to the quality of divinity expressed in that perfect creation. This creation is undilutedly divine, but it's not infinite. It's important that we realize something can be perfect without filling everything. Do you follow me? Now, Havona serves as a nucleus of the seven super-universes, right? One of the characteristics of a nucleus is that it exists in relation to a cytoplasm, the white of the egg. To go back to eggs again. I love eggs. I love to use them as a
I love them. They repel me, but that's all right.
You only have to visualize them. You don't have to eat them. Havona characteristics are transmitted out here as beings come out here. And when this universe is finished, when the seven super-universes are finished, I think we're going to have another nucleus, the second nucleus. The appearance of the first nucleus is associated with the appearance of the Paradise Trinity. The development of the second nucleus, which is the grand universe, meaning the seven super-universes as dependent on the central universe. The appearance of this second nucleus is also associated with the formation of a Trinity, the first experiential Trinity. This is the Trinity made up of the Supreme Being, the Supreme Creators, the architects of the Master Universe. I don't think that there will be any nucleus formed when the first outer space level is perfected. I think the four outer space levels are successive cytoplasmic areas in relation to this continuing nucleus. Because not until all four outer space levels have been completed do we again witness the formation of a Trinity. It takes the appearance, the emergence of God the Ultimate to produce the second experiential Trinity, made up of the Supreme Being, the Ultimate, and this mysterious, unrevealed consummator of universe destiny. Now, is this the end? Well, I don't think so. You see, there's still the deity absolute. We've come back now to the yolk of the egg. Could the deity absolute ever be experientialized? The answer is no. You'd have to exhaust infinity to do that. What's going to happen then? Are we at a deadlock? Are we at an impasse? The second experiential Trinity has a function which suggests something larger than the Master Universe. What is this master universe? Is it an end? I submit that the master universe is the third nucleus, the final nucleus, and that it exists in relation to some outer cytoplasmic universe which is infinite, which has no end.
Well, there won't be any nuclear fission then with the three.
No. It's a triple nucleus. I visualize this. At the beginning of all things, we had two existential deities and a power base for operations. They trinitized an equal being, the infinite spirit, and produced Havana. At the final master universe age, the age of the fourth outer space level, I can see harmony, a theme reappearing. Once again, we have two unique deities, experiential deities this time. Once again, we have a power base for operation, the perfected master universe. And I would suggest, and the papers will support this, that the Supreme Being and the Ultimate will in some unimaginable way trinitize God the Absolute and begin the invasion of the cosmos infinite. They will establish a beachhead on the shores of infinity. Now, God the Absolute, so trinitized, is sub-infinite, because neither the Supreme Being nor the Ultimate nor the combination of the two is an infinite deity. But how vast are the resources on which they draw. And remember, they can mobilize all of the experiential potential from the tennis ball, the bedroom, the city block, the cubic city, and the moon. This is vast. This is less than infinite, but nonetheless tremendous. What they can mobilize will not represent an unworthy effort. And God the Absolute, I think, is going to appear. And since he's sub-infinite, he can grow. And I think this is the final adventure, the post-ultimate adventure. And I think we'll be there, because the papers instruct us that the last dimension of human personality is competent to attempt a sub-infinite penetration of the absolute level of reality. We can get up onto the third floor, and we can grow and grow and grow. And the reason that we can't ever finish is because I drew this a little wrong. This building happens to be open to the skies. There's no roof on the third floor. We can go, and we are never going to hit the top. There is no roof on the third floor. Again, as I consider this, the first universe age had no beginning in time. It had an end in time. The last universe age will be the mirror image of the first. It will have a beginning in time. It will have no end in time. Let me ask you some questions. What kind of problems are you hitting in your reading that bother you, if anything? Why don't you lead out, Betty?
Let me think a moment, please. I can't give flash answers.
As we said last year, the whole objective of one of these seminars is to emerge with an ignorance that is more properly unified. We're never going to know very much about what these people are telling us, but we can get our ignorance well unified. And a unified ignorance is so much more comforting than chaotic ignorance.
I don't want to be the whole front. Well, actually, I think Bud gave me very good advice. He said to read the book as a novel.
Yes.
I have found out that of course, everything reverts back eventually to self, doesn't it?
Sure.
Well, I find that I've been quite cynical, and I'm having to overcome cynicism to get this book. Do you
Yes.
know what I mean? I'm not quite sure I do, but I I didn't realize what a cynic I was, actually, until I began reading this. I read it rather slowly, and I'm afraid after I finish a paper, I go back and reread it. Bud suggests, and I think he's quite right, and Dorothy also, that I read it without going back and just keep going forward.
Well, a cynic is a disappointed idealist.
It's what, Bill?
A cynic is a disappointed idealist.
And didn't Jesus win him over in Rome?
Mm-hmm. Well, the cynics meant something different in those days. You see, a cynic is a person who has not only hoped too high, that's all right, but the idealist expects too high. And if you don't separate your hopes and your expectations, you foredoom yourself to disappointment. As it says in the Morantia Life, if you make fewer personal plans pertaining to other personalities, you will become father to fewer disappointments. That's a very great statement.
Yes, it is, indeed.
I put it in my own words and thinking by saying that I hope I'm a realist who has ideals, because an idealist views life in serious distortion, so does a cynic. Serious distortion. Both cynic and idealist view life with one eye, and they see life flat. Both cynic and idealist have unified their hopes and their expectations. The idealist has attempted to unify them on a high level, and the cynic has attempted to unify them on a very low level. And I believe they should be separated. In other words, I think we should hope high and expect low. The problem arises partly because things are not just real or not real. Things are not just actual or potential. We encounter a very troublesome gray area, which I would call the zone of becoming. Now let's take a good, for instance, let's take the Brotherhood of Man. Is this real? No, of course not. Of course not. I read a headline, what was that earth-shattering headline we saw at lunch, Bob? Somebody is not going to be somebody else's champagne girl anymore. Now, I don't know any of the names, but I understand champagne. Somebody is no longer swinging with somebody else who is not digging that somebody or something like that. Well, at the same time, can you say that the Brotherhood of Man is not a reality? No, you can't say that either. It's in this confusional area. It's an ideal. It's not yet a down-to-earth working idea. It will be an idea someday. I have my hopes and my expectations better separated than they've ever been before. When I meet a new brother, I know he's a brother, and I hope that he feels this way. But I don't expect him to be any more than a so-and-so who will try and do me in. And this happens every now and then. And when I meet my percentage of SOBs, I'm not shattered, I'm not shook up. I don't expect anything more. I defend myself to the best of my ability. I won't let him destroy me. And I just chuckle and I say, well, the human race has only been out of the jungle a few thousand years. Civilization hasn't got to him yet. Maybe it won't, but there's hope for his kids and his grandchildren. I hope he's a nice guy. I don't expect him to be. As long as you hope and expect at the same level, you're in trouble. Because you're either going to become a Pollyanna, going through life saying evil is not here, which makes you a Buddhist, or else you're going to get to be a hard-boiled cynic and saying there ain't nothing good. And I think life is a mix. I think both the idealist and the cynic have slipped into the ditch. One on one side of the road, one on the other, and the crown road is difficult to drive on. It takes a lot of steady steering because it's slippery. I've been in both ditches at one time or another, but I don't like to stay in the ditch. I want to drive down the road. And to me, if you look at life with high hopes and very realistic expectations, how good could it be and how loused up might it get? I think you get not visual confusion, I think you get depth perception. This is the range-finding principle. Our two eyes see things from a different angle of vision. The result is not confusion, the result is depth perception. I think you have greater insight into life. you get a better stereoscopic effect of evaluation. Each year I live, I grow to expect less of my fellow men, and I think I love them a little more. I expect less of the human race today than at any time in my short life, and I think I have more affection for them than I've ever had before. My expectations are lower than they've ever been, and my hopes are higher. And as you broaden the base of your vision, you get greater and greater depth perception. Are you with me?
Oh, yes, I certainly am. I think that's wonderful. And as I told, but things like this make me, I don't know why they make me want to cry.
I understand. I understand.
Well, we have an infinite supply of Kleenex.
I'll tell you what this book means to me. If you'd like, and this may be worth taping, I gave a talk for the Oklahoma Society. It may be worth taping. I gave a talk for the Oklahoma Society, and this was an open meeting. It was in the church, which they were then in process of abandoning. And it was advertised in the newspaper, and so lots of people showed up. And I said, I'd like to talk about this book and what it means to me, because this book has very deep religious significance. But in my personal experience, I cannot separate religion and philosophy. The two are inseparable. I can't philosophize without getting religious, and I can't deal with religion without becoming involved in philosophy. I said, this book helps me think straight. There are two basic approaches which men have tried in civilization. One is exemplified in the medieval Christian attitude. When the Black Death hit Florence, the devout Florentine bowed his head, clasped his hands together, and prayed, saying, as he buried his family, "The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord." The Hindu and the Buddhist also attempt a spiritistic approach to reality. They say it isn't real. The Buddhist says that this world is an illusion. It's Maya. And my favorite illustration is a real sweet story from the Tripitaka of Buddhism. There are three monks. I think I told you this story last year. They're out begging. And they've got their begging bowls and their saffron robes. And of course what they're begging for is not money, but rice. And there's a hair in each begging bowl. And of course a hair in your soup bowl is unpleasant. The youngest monk, who's a neophyte, he's very annoyed with the hair. This is a horrid thought. The older monk, the in-betweener, he's not annoyed with the hair because while he perceives the hair, he knows it's not real. The oldest monk is on the threshold of nirvana. He does not see the hair. That's one way of dealing with the material problems of life. You either say they're not real, or you bow your head and trust in the Lord. Now comes the Renaissance and the revival of Greek humanism, and the Florentine began to bestir himself. And he began to say, now look, there's something we can do about this. Eventually we wind up with sanitary practices. We begin to discover that this is a universe of law and order, and if we can learn about these laws, we do not have to be passive in relation to our environment. Humanism evolves. The non-religious, intellectual approach to life. Man's reason strikes off the shackles of limiting, inhibiting faith. And the book speaks of faith as something which limits, in contrast to belief which liberates. And he says, well, let's have at these problems. He finds out about sewage disposal. He eventually winds up with medicine. He eventually winds up with atomic energy. And he falls in love with this concept. He attempts to approach reality using mind instead of spirit. And believe me, he's successful. Our whole industrial civilization, this is right out of our Problems of Secularism at the end of the book, evolves by virtue of the fact that man's logical thinking attacks material reality. But there's something wrong with this approach too. Because in my lifetime, we have scientifically killed more people than have been killed in the Christian era. I have witnessed fear spread over all the world. For the first time, the people in the United States of America are thinking as though they lived in the Balkans. The enemy is only a few hours away. This is the way Bulgarians once thought about Serbians, and Montenegrins thought about Romanians, and they were all afraid of Russia and Austria-Hungary and Turkey. There's something wrong with this approach. I think there's something wrong with the spiritistic approach. I don't like the idea of just bowing my head and saying, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord, if we can keep people alive. These papers help me out of this impasse. These papers teach me that total reality exists in 3 different levels. And when I spell reality with an R, capital R, this is the biggest word I know. It's synonymous with infinity. This is everything that has been, is, or will be. These papers teach me, way over in the next to the last page in this book, that reality falls into 3 general categories: thing, meaning, and value. And I deem this to be one of the most helpful concepts in all the papers. Write the word reality across the top of the page and then draw 3 columns under it. I'll put it on the blackboard. These headings could well cover the 3 divisions of energy, which is matter, mind, and spirit. These papers instruct me that when I'm working in the domain of things, the Renaissance Florentine attitude is right. I should use reason. I have no right to pray until I've exhausted human resources. They tell me when I'm over in the domain of value, I should use faith. Things never touch values. Matter never touches spirit. But both impinge on this fascinating intermediate zone. And here, in the domain of meanings, I may attempt to use logic. If I'm successful, if the human race is successful, then, as a result of this, we evolve science and religion and philosophy. If we can think clearly, then we can respond to the great challenge that's portrayed in these papers. Every religion portrays a challenge. Medieval Christianity, the challenge very largely was the fear of hell. Very little about the love of God. The Zoroastrian religion presents a challenge. It's terrifically morally stimulating. It says, choose sides. There's Ahura Mazda and the forces of light, and there's Ahriman with the forces of darkness. And in the annals of time, They contend as equal contenders, even though likeness triumphs in eternity. Buddhism challenges you. Do you want to be separate from the oversoul of creation with all this illusion? Or by stripping yourself of these illusions, can you find unity with the oversoul of creation? The Urantia book presents a challenge. The Urantia book, at least 3 times, if not more, in the papers, makes this statement. On Paradise, energy and spirit are coordinate. In Havona, they are unified. But in the evolutionary cosmos, energy matter is dominant, save in personality, where spirit, through the mediation of mind, is striving for the mastery. Let's see what that means. Mind can whip matter. The material universe is a mind-managed, mind-dominated physical creation, starting with the third source and center, and running right down through the force organizers, power directors, and so on. We can see that on the human level. The mind of man is slowly but certainly dominating this planet. When we set up a pipeline, what are we doing but building an artery in the planet? When we lay a telegraph line, what are we doing but laying a nerve on the planet? We're remaking this planet in our own image. Someday we'll control weather if we don't blow ourselves up first. We are slowly but certainly, through our science, dominating our physical environment. But we're attempting to do this without spirit. This is mind unidentified with spirit. This is the secular, humanistic approach to the domain of things. And the net result is that we breed fear. Why? Because we can't stop worshiping. And when we stop worshiping God, we keep on worshiping, perhaps science. I have a friend who is deeply religious, and the name of his religion is science. You show him any mystery which science can't explain, and he answers credo credamus. I believe, we believe that science will explain this in the future. This is faith in this level. It's a dislocation of faith. When Neanderthals buried their dead, they buried stone axes with them because they knew they were going someplace better than where they'd been, and it would be a happy hunting ground, and this stone axe would come in handy. They believed. Man is incurably worshipful. When he stops worshiping God, he starts worshiping something temporal. And he probably ends up by worshiping the state, because the state is the greatest repository of power. Power worship power becomes the object of man's worship. When man worships the state, if he starts out a conservative, he ends up a fascist. And if he starts out a liberal, he ends up a communist. And as between a fascist and a communist, I can make no choice. This is why we have loused things up almost beyond recognition in this generation. I don't think, again to quote the Blue Book, you can run a free society without God any more than you could run the solar system without gravity. This book tells me how to approach reality sanely and at the same time worshipfully. This book tells me that when I'm working with the domain of things, I depend on mind to attack. And if we attack, we'll win. At the same time, this mind has got to become subordinated to spirit. Otherwise, the power of science begets fear, not trust. We have more fear in the world today than we've ever had in human history, with all of our prosperity. I sit in my office in Chicago and I look down Michigan Avenue, and I love this dirty city that I was born in. And I think of the 150 years that men have been building that city, and we now know it could be destroyed in 150 minutes, just laid flat. And this could happen. This could happen before I get back home. You know what I mean? Next week, this week. This book tells me how to be sane. This book challenges me, as it should challenge the whole human race. Can we put mind to work, whipping matter, and at the same time allying mind with spirit, so that this mind becomes socially fragrant, morally sound, and ethically balanced? And this we can do because we have the power of choice to subordinate mind to spirit. And when we do this, we are working with the grain of the universe, which is another way of saying we're working in accordance with God's will. This is the first thing I've ever encountered which makes sense to me on all levels, materially, intellectually, and spiritually. I've never found anything like it. Betty, that's what the book means to me in non-technical language. This is in the book. You'll find it over here. It's the greatest philosophic concept in the book, I think. It's at the last page at the end of the book, I believe. You know, I've always wondered who wrote this book, and it says on here.
Don't be impelled. I suspected.
Well, she may not have written the book, but she's sure written in this one. I'm sorry, I missed the page. It's 2094 instead of 2096. In paragraph 2, there are just three elements in universal reality: fact, idea, and relation. The religious consciousness identifies these realities as science, philosophy, and truth. Philosophy would be inclined to view these activities as reason, wisdom, and faith. Physical reality, intellectual reality, and spiritual reality. We are in the habit of designating these realities as thing, meaning, and value. And of course, those last three words are such wonderful words because they're so small that I can understand them. Would you like me to read you the most awful thing in the book about the problem of the present? Page 2082. Without God, paragraph 3, without God, without religion, scientific secularism can never coordinate its forces, harmonize its divergent and rivalrous interests, races, and nationalisms. This secularistic human society, which is us today, here and now, notwithstanding its unparalleled materialistic achievement, is slowly disintegrating. The chief cohesive force resisting this disintegration of antagonism is nationalism. And nationalism is the chief barrier to world peace. We're in trouble. The most vital thing in the world today is nationalism. And the most grievous threat to world peace is nationalism. We're in the proposition of Solomon in the temple. If we pull at the columns, sure, we'll pull the temple down, but we're going to die in the debris. This is the horns of a real dilemma.
It's like using whiskey to cure a cold. You either keep the cold or you become south.
That's right.
In
That's
the
right.
Ermia lectures, it says there will never be world peace until there's the world sovereignty. That's a long ways off.
It is.
It means that we're going to have wars.
Well, let me ask you this. What force in the world today is pushing scientific progress the strongest? It's nationalism. It's rocketry and all that sort of thing.
This is a rather ominous bit here. Still more terrible destruction is yet to come. This book I felt up to this point was 1934. Oh, Second World War was in the future then. Oh, I see. I couldn't think of it.
However, that might not stop with the Second World War. We've at least had one installment, and I hope we've had the full payment. Yes, Ruth?
That comment, that phrase of yours, the grain of the universe, sticks in my mind because it is illuminating. To me, the irrational makes that very plain. What the grain of the universe is, the evolutionary system.
Sure.
Not only biologically, physically, of course, first, and then biologically, but morally and spiritually, and how we can go along with it instead of fighting.
Yes. Why work across the grain?
That's it. One can do it so much more intelligently. One understands what the grain of the universe is. The fundamental movement.
This thing looks so simple, but yet you stop and think of man's approach to reality, and he tends to go in either of the extreme columns, and he doesn't get them working together. This is not simple. This seems simple because it happens to be truth. A few times he's tried the middle column. That's the most futile of all. The Greek philosophers never got it off the ground. I mean, actually, how many people really were inspired by Socrates and Plato? They were annoyed by Socrates, I believe, as subsequent events prove. The common people never heard Plato. What influence did Pythagoras have of a lasting nature? The Stoic and the Epicurean schools didn't live. Only religions lived. And yet religions have always attempted to destroy science and to fight this because science quarrels properly with the superstitions of religion and improperly with the truths of religion.
Bill, why did the religions like the organization?
Yeah, they all got organized. Sure. Sure. That's what makes democracy work, too. It's organization of political spoilsmen who see to it that the machinery works when the citizens are indifferent. Pardon me if I sound cynical, but that I live in
I
Chicago.
love cynicism. I think that's why I was one or am one.
So could it be, too, that applies to religion? I'm thinking of the Hindu religion, which in its idealistic top echelon, it is very philosophic. But down among the people, it is full of pagan gods
sure.
and compromised with the most primitive instincts
But
of
look at
the
the people,
human race.
look at the people who believe in Hinduism.
I know.
They're mostly illiterate.
Yeah.
They can't philosophize.
No.
Therefore they have to go to pagan gods.
Religion has to work on all levels. It has to work on the level of truth and love. It's got to work on mixed levels. It's got to be institutionalized. It's got to have symbols. There are people who require symbols. It's got to have ritual. There are people who love ritual and are inspired by it. And then it's got to get really alloyed with evolutionary religion. Now listen, I've seen Roman Catholicism in the backwoods of Nicaragua where Spanish isn't understood. You're dealing with Indian dialects. And I would submit that Roman Catholicism, in that grossly adulterated form, is still better than just plain animism. Although, believe me, they've got it under pretty good control down there. They've got their old gods still.
Bill, is
Yes.
that statement that Bud made about Hinduism accurate?
Say it
About
again.
it being embraced
Well,
by the illiterate?
I'm talking about the conglomerate of the citizen of India, which has so many millions of...
Yeah, but the hierarchy has to be either too.
Well, they can philosophize on
Yes.
it, but the majority can't.
Here, as between Kali worship at the bottom, and that's not really at the bottom,
Yeah.
and the concept of Sankaras Advaita Vedanta at the top, the person worshiping Kali, the wife of Shiva the destroyer, and trying to placate Kali, and you're involved in everything from sacrifice to temple prostitution, and that's a long ways away from the high caste Brahmin contemplating the unity of his soul with his soul, the Atman,
Yeah.
with the oversoul of creation. And it's very similar to a peasant worshiping an icon, not using an icon as a symbol. And yet the human spirit will run through this. I think of James Bissett Pratt's description of a peasant in Rangoon in a Buddhist temple. And he was talking to this Buddhist monk who was quite literate. And the peasant was praying to Buddha. And the monk says, you see, the trouble we have with our illiterates. The monk knew that Buddha couldn't hear. But the peasant woman knew that God could hear, and her religion was a damn sight better than the monk's theology.
Bill, if Moses didn't have to lead a bunch of Bedouins through the desert, look at what the Jewish nation would be today. If he could have really given him his real concept,
Sure.
instead of this watered down version,
But it wouldn't sell.
it wouldn't sell.
Ignatin wouldn't compromise, and he failed totally. You've got to water it down. Look, there were two concepts that plagued Jesus. He never succeeded in rising above either one of them, because he had to work with first century brains reared in the Commonwealth of Israel. This was his material. Number one was, you are the Messiah. Number two was the kingdom idea. He did his best to get away from both. Did you ever stop and think that Jesus never wanted to be called the Christ? He was not the Messiah. The word Christ originally is the Greek for Messiah.
Haven't we taken the anointed?
It originally meant the anointed one, yes. The anointed in the sense that David was.
Well, that was the Messiah.
Sure, the Messiah was, by most of the Jewish people, was to be a wonderful king. A George Washington, if you please, who would drive the Romans into the sea and let's get our country back. A very laudable patriotic ambition, you know.
National.
It was nationalism, yes.
A group God.
Yes, and yet Yahweh was also an international God, in another sense.
Yes.
There were two schools of thought. There were two schools of thought. They fought it out during the Babylonian captivity, and the nationalists won.
If Moses could have stuck around for about 700 years, do you think he could have eventually elevated this?
Sure. The prophets did a pretty good job. When you start with what Moses had to settle for, and then go as far as 2nd Isaiah, but this is the darndest evolution of religion on the planet. To me, the divinity of the Old Testament has nothing to do with the inspiration of the words, it's the progression of the prophets. This is unique in human history.
But they never dropped the Lord, the one God, Lord of Israel.
What do you mean by that?
Oh yes. Let me answer.
Okay.
No other group ever had a succession of prophets, building one on the other. Other groups have had wise teachers and men who knew truth. But this group had them on the installment plan. And when you conceive of the God of 2nd Isaiah in Babylon, do you realize that Jesus practically quotes all of 2nd Isaiah in his teachings? This is an internationalist God. This is no God of any chosen people. And that's why he was at loggerheads with Jewish nationalism.
They didn't take it in the time 2nd Isaiah than everything.
Dorothy, they whipped him. But the stuff he wrote was so blasted beautiful, they couldn't resist putting it in their scripture.
And
The sheer beauty of his teaching is what caused it to
and
survive.
that's why they got so many contradictions in it.
Yes. He's the one that wrote, "Come now, let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, yet shall they be white as wool." Oh, this is a great God. Now this was the culmination of the teachings of the Jewish prophets. Starting out with the God of Mount Sinai, the spirit demon of Mount Sinai, who gave them some shrewd advice just before you take off for the desert. Latch on to all the Egyptian possessions you can glom. But if you get critical of Moses, all you have to do is study Akhenaten. Here was an idealist. He wouldn't compromise. And he was the most powerful man on earth because he was the theological head, the temporal being of the best organized state on earth at that time. And he had behind him the full authority of the Egyptian Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. And as long as he lived, he could maintain monotheism. But since he wouldn't compromise, he didn't convert. He drove the priesthood underground. And when he died, they came topside and they chiseled his name off all the temples and went back to polytheism again. Moses would compromise. He made a sale.
Compromise then is a necessity for
You don't have a choice. Jesus compromised. Jesus compromised on 2 points. He said, all right, I am the Christ. but not such a Christ as you're expecting. And he never did eradicate the idea of the kingdom of heaven. The idea was catchy. These people thought in those terms. You see, Jesus could not abrogate the free will of the apostles. He couldn't change them. They insisted on these beliefs. So he either had to fire them or else seek to modify them and at least go along with the form of their beliefs.